Greetings everyone. I would like to quickly introduce myself. I am Bianca Ejequinon, a BS Ed Social Studies 4 student. And today, I'll be discussing the continuation of evaluating messages and or images of different types of text reflecting different cultures. So let's start. First is cultural text. Cultural texts are those objects, actions, and behaviors that reveal cultural meanings. So one example is a photo. A photo is an image, but it is also a cultural text that consists of cultural information beyond just the picture itself. So, the food and clothing also suggest cultural information. With this, the entire place and space, all of the people and interaction, and the various forms in which they manifest themselves are readable text. Further, this initial description of a cultural text may make it seem as though everything is a cultural text. While in some sense true, this does not mean that every text has a particular relevance. So what does it mean? This means that what is in a space and what happens in the space are all cultural texts that are available for analysis. But the analysis can be challenging because we have all agreed to the meanings and we take them for granted. So that's it. Next slide is detecting bias in media. We will be talking about the bias that's happening in all media platforms. So, media bias is rampant among various kinds of media platforms. Thus, it is necessity that we look into different sources in order to verify its accuracy and relevance. So there are types of bias. First is bias by omission. It is the phenomenon in which people prefer omission over commission, and people tend to judge harm as a result of commission more negatively than harm as a result of omission. So in short, it ignores facts that tend to disprove liberal or conservative claims. Under this are the omitting coverage and produces one-sided stories. In omitting coverage, the example is a new factory is said to be built at a certain location. Upon hearing such news, people disagreed and wanted it to be stopped, so they set up a rally and signed petitions to stop building such infrastructure. It could have reached the social media and people would trend such issue, but the newspaper and the television might not cover this news story. Produces one-sided stories. So the example is, media might cover the news about the said factory and will only focus on people approving of it and on statistics showing how building the factory will increase work rate. So, people might be convinced that it is a good idea without them realizing that they have not heard the other side of the story. Building this factory will cause pollution, affect people living near the area, and the like. Next is bias by emphasis. The first headline you see on a newspaper or on a live news report and what story has the longest coverage are the ones that will be stuck in your head and as you read or watch along a news story. So the example is, some unnecessary news were released by the government to silence the news coverage of the true tale of the crime that happened, which involved the death of a construction worker after he was mistakenly and carelessly shot by a policeman. Next slide is bias by use of language. Using words that imply prejudice and offensive meanings is a bias by use of language. Example is, when you use the N-word and you are not part of the black community, that shows disrespect towards them. Another thing is the term handicapped is not acceptable nowadays. So, people choose to use the term people with disability. Bias in photos. Image biases often take place to shape a viewer or a reader's perception of a certain person or an event. So below is the example of bias in photo. Basically, some network and paparazzi will only post the first picture wherein the man is like giving a middle finger to the media without knowing or showing the other angle of the taken picture. Next is bias in the source. If a news comes from a known source, it would be easier to believe it than if it comes from an individual researcher. An example for this is that an article about COVID vaccine from a drug company may have a different content from an article of an individual researcher. This drug company may be doing it just for media exposure and to influence the public to avail their product. Bias by repetition. Repetition is used to reinforce unfounded and irrational claims. After hearing these ideas repeatedly, we begin to accept them as the truth. And the next slide is the example of bias by repetition. So with this, people tend to ascribe higher credibility to messages that they repeatedly encounter and are repeatedly presented. Bias by headlines. Some headlines can be deceptive as their main purpose is to grab attention. As a result, many people only read the headlines, which can create a distorted sense of what is really going on and turning a non-event into a sensational event. The outcome? It will lead to disseminating of fake news or misleading information. Next, bias by diversity. It is a representation of certain identity groups in the media is often minimal or non-existent, particularly for those in marginalized groups such as racial or cultural minorities. Example, when Black women are the victims of rape, news coverage may draw on the stereotype of Black women as hypersexual Jezebels who provoke sexual assault and therefore cannot be considered legitimate victims of violence. Bias from the point of view. This refers to from whose point of view or perspective is the news reported. Example, political coverage often focuses on how issues affect politicians or corporate executives rather than those directly affected by the issue, such as many stories on parental notification of abortion emphasized the tough choice confronting male politicians while quoting on no women under 18, those most affected by the debate. Bias in numbers and statistics. Statistics are often used to create false impressions or manipulated to make a point, either underestimating or overestimating, or just making up the numbers. Example, to make news regarding disasters seem worthy of reading about, numbers can be inflated. 100 people injured in an air crash can be the same as only minor injuries in the air crash, reflecting the opinion of the person doing the counting. Now, let us discuss the different types of text. We have the narrative text, descriptive text, expository text, and the argumentative text. First is narrative text. It is any type of writing that presents a series of events of both fiction, novel, short stories, poems, and non-fiction, memoirs, biographies, news stories. With this, narrative text, it is characterized by dynamic verbs and adverbials such as and then, first, second, third. It uses imaginative language and express emotion, often through the use of imagery, metaphors, and symbols. Example, first, we went to the market and then we went home to cook dinner. After that, we watched our favorite movie. Descriptive text. Emphasize the location of persons and things in space. It can be technical or objective, or impressionistic or subjective. Also, descriptive text states specific participant, uses adjectives, uses simple present tense, action verbs, adverbs, and positional verbs. Expository texts are texts meant to inform or to educate the reader on a specific topic. It is also called an informational text because these are the non-fiction texts that give facts and information about a topic. Expository text examples. Some places known for having expository text are textbooks, news articles, magazine articles, informative websites, self-help books, how-to books, history books, and science books. Lastly is argumentative text. The argumentative text or essay is a genre of writing that requires the student to investigate a topic, collect, generate, and evaluate evidence, and establish a position on the topic in a concise manner. So an argumentative text is wherein the writer is either for or against an issue or subject, or presents the case for both sides. So the next slide is the example of an argumentative text. And that's it. Hope you learned something from the discussion. Thank you for listening.